so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the big stories, the stories that are often the most important stories that we do, right? Those are the stories that that reveal a systemic failure, a pattern, a breakdown, something that's supposed to help that ends up completely not only not helping but harming. And one of the big problems with this kind of reporting is that too often, because they're so data driven and almost like we have to show off how much data we did and how much work we did, they become these really boring, eat your peas kind of stories. You know, we used to call them DBIs, dull but important, and by God, you're going to read them because I'm telling you it's important, but not because it's compelling. So we've really been working hard at really marrying those really important stories, database, but giving that a human face. How do you humanize something so that you care, and you care enough so that you want a change, or you require a change, or it touches you in some way? So I'm a proponent of data. Start with the data. The data is what helps you build the skeleton of your story. It shows patterns. It gives you the subplots. It sometimes illuminates some patterns that you aren't even aware, or things that you know, oh, here's where the issue is. So for instance, well, let me just say that. So that's the skeleton, okay? But the muscle, the power of the story, the heart of it is the people. We write about this stuff because it's important. We write about it because it's impacting someone, but you have to make that connection for anyone to care. So the key to a narrative, and as anyone I think knows, is the characters, but too often we really lose track of that in our journalism, is that, and the characters are the people to whom these things are happening, or to whom this is important. And I'll say that, you know, invariably the characters, three types of characters. One is the absolutely sympathetic character. How can you not, you know, relate to this person, right? And for us, we did a series on 477 children who died under the watch of the Department of Children and Families, and you'll say, well, how can you not care about dead children? Then there's not obviously sympathetic, you know, subjects like prisoners, but we've done that as well. And then there's a story where it's a process story and the victim isn't really quite obvious, but then you need to go and build that story around the people who are at the center of the power player, who are because inevitably it's about, you know, abusing power, and so then you have to focus on the characters who are abusing power. So let me start with the data. Okay, so yes, the numbers tell a story, and it helps you find the most compelling examples. So in Innocence Lost, like I said, we went through 6 years worth of data. We compiled like this enormous database and came up with 477 children who had died, who had had some kind of interaction already with the Department of Children and Families, so they knew that there was a problem, right? So we had some criteria that we were looking at when we were looking at the data, and it was how many times did DCF have interactions with this family? You know, so we could establish that it wasn't just a one-off. You know, in every case, they had to have at least one. What indicators were that the family, that there was issues with the family, you know, drug abuse, previous calls for service by police, et cetera. Had there been any other children who had either been abused or pulled from the home? So all this went into this huge database, and that really helped us find some of the key findings in the series. The overwhelming majority of the children who died, it was infants and toddlers, which was surprising for us, right? But those are the ones, like we always talk about, give voice to the voiceless. Those are the kids who can't complain. They can't talk about what their parents or their caretakers are doing to them. We found that the disabled and, again, medically complex children also were a huge, you know, constitute a huge number of children who had been, who had died. Again, 18% of the total. And that drug abuse, which might seem obvious, but drug abuse among the parents, especially with the whole pill mill and the opiates, really contributed to a lot of what was happening with the deaths of these children, because the state was refusing to remove them from a home and wasn't giving the parents the tools to deal with the drug addiction. But those are just numbers, right? But we turned that database that was a reporting tool into a searchable database that told the story of every child that died. And let me tell you, that was a huge undertaking, because when we started the project, we had no idea that we were going to turn up 477 children. And the database, and I left some of these out front, but the database, and somebody's talking about the power of photos, but you know, we made it an effort that we were going to chronicle each child who died, including a newborn who died so young he hadn't even had a name, that we were going to try to tell their stories. And so the power of this is that if you read the headline and you just looked at this, you understand like what was lost here. And I think that when you're telling a story, don't lose track also of the visuals and the power of small details to convey, you know, so much more than you can possibly, you know, imagine. Just, you know, the teddy bear, the leopard print, you know, little blankie that they held, etc. So again, you're going to say, well, okay, you know what? These are dead kids. How can you screw that up? Well, I will say that some organizations have, but okay, I'm just going to, it's a given. But you know what? It's not just when you have an obviously compelling character. We had a project for the last 2 years. Reporter Julie Brown has been working on projects that involve the horrendous abuse in Florida prison systems with prisoners. Okay, that is not overtly a very sympathetic group of people. And that tip came from an inmate who was a burglar, in fact, from St. Pete, you know, who got sentenced to a ridiculous amount of time for a series of burglaries. He'll never get out of jail. He had sent this tip to, I mean, you know, the governor, the Department of Corrections, tons of news outlets. Anybody who's an editor in a newsroom, you've gotten one of those overstuffed envelopes, right, run across your desk with the prison number, right? So you know what I'm talking about. So we got one of those. But my investigative editor actually reached out to him after reading the letter, because it sounded pretty credible. And the first story in that series ended up being about a 50-year-old mentally ill inmate. He was in prison on cocaine charges. This guy defecated in his cell, wouldn't pick it up, so the guards put him in this rigged shower, and they turned on the hot water. They kept him there for 2 hours in spite of his screams, and he scalded to death. The inmate who gave us the tip, he knew this because he had to clean up the shower and pick up skin, the flesh that was left on this guy. Now, all of us would agree, in a civilized society, somebody on drug charges does not deserve the death penalty. So you can relate, right? Because it could be your cousin who got into trouble, or you know, your mentally ill stepsister, or you know, so it's relatable. And lastly, I will tell you that there are stories where you simply don't have an obvious victim. And we did a story, we just recently did a series about this little Tony city, Bal Harbor, super rich. Cops obviously have a lot of money and not a lot of things to do, so they decide to create this money laundering sting operation with another city. And you know, we're the victims, right? We're the taxpayers. They're using our money. They got like they laundered $70 million, $1 million. Who knows what happens? They were, you know, going around the country, flying first class, $1,000 tabs on their, you know, restaurant bills, and et cetera, et cetera. Never made an arrest, by the way. Your tax money at work. And so the thing is, how do you know, there is a victim, but it's a little less clear, but you want to invoke an emotion, and the emotion is outrage. And there was a great, I think, anecdote that did that, when there's a scene where these cops, they had really commandeered this nice hotel in Bal Harbor, and they would sit around the pool smoking nice cigars and drinking their drinks. And so this Haitian guard comes up to this group of boisterous people who are leaving, you know, glass by the pool, and they're not supposed to, and says, can you please pick up after yourself? And so they're like, no. And he's like, well, I'm going to have to call the police. And they say, we are the police. And really, thank you. That's such a telling example of somebody who is just so blatantly abusing power. And it really, helped us bring that story to life while really explaining a super complicated financial process. So that is my three types of victims. There you go. Anybody wants?